This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Dragons. Send them all out. Start turning green strongholds to our cause.
We will secure victory with armies, not with dragons alone. The Greens understand that.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
All right, Serious Danger listeners, it is just me this week. It's Emerald here. This is Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia. Sans Tom this week because he is busy in the UK rigging the election or something. I don't really know. So I have to tell you that this is not an official Greens Party podcast, regardless of what Tom says and what he keeps trying to do to this beautiful podcast that we love so much. It is made possible with the help of the Green Institute and produced by Michael the Greek Griffin. But don't worry, you don't just have to listen to me being hilarious and insightful for the whole episode, because I am joined again this week by a return guest, the only good journalist, writer, Rachel Withers. We discuss the UK election, which she knows a lot more about than I do, and the parallels with what's going on in Australia and the Greens and all those fun things. And of course, we talk about Fatima Payman's resignation from Labor and the goss on the event of the year, the Midwinter Ball at Australian Parliament. Before we get Rachel on, though, I did just want to thank our new patrons. We have James J and James B. We have Joelle, Sarah, Patrice, Dana, Laura, and Tanya. Thank you for signing up to get access to bonus content and support the show. It helps pay Mike's wages, helps keep the show going. We love you and we appreciate it a lot. The latest episode that came out on Patreon was this bonus episode that Tom recorded with leftist streamer and Novara Media regular Helena, aka at No Justice MTG. If you want to know more about the UK election and how we got here, because you saw the results and now you're like, I'm interested in this, you can listen to that episode. They go deep into it. It's very interesting. And there's a whole back catalogue of stuff there on the Patreon feed. If you haven't signed up already, it's only $3 a month. It helps us greatly, and you can listen to us rattle on more and more. We do like deep dives into vaping and that sort of thing. So that's it. Thank you to the patrons. And now I'm going to get Rachel back on. Welcome back to the podcast, writer Rachel Withers. How are you doing?
Hello. Good to be back in Tom's seat.
In Tom's seat, that's right.
Tom
You did
Bella.
so well in the audition. We've decided to simply boot Tom from the show, and you're the co-host now. So welcome. Congratulations.
This is just like when he got booted from the ABC.
Last time you went, it wasn't that long ago actually that you came on the podcast episode 128, and we were talking about Palestinian statehood. And now we're kind of going to be talking about the fallout from that question even more.
Yeah, it seems that every time I come on here, that's been dominating Parliament, but it's been dominating Parliament every week for a while now, it seems.
I mean, it is an enormous war and genocide unfolding in our time, so it probably makes sense that we're talking about it. But putting genocide aside for a second, we've got something much more important to talk about, which is, of course, the event of the year, the sparkliest of all balls, the Midwinter Ball in Canberra. Were you there? Did you make it?
No, I do not get invited to such events.
So sad. I can't believe it.
I'm not part of the press gallery kind of.
Have you ever been?
No.
No. Okay. So you've never been to the Midwinter Ball? Yeah.
No. I don't know what I would do if I got invited. I'd like to say I wouldn't go on principle, but then there are a whole bunch of politicians who you'd think would not go on principle who go anyway. So.
Well, that's an interesting question, right? Like I know in 2022, a bunch of Greens MPs sat it out and were outside protesting, although I understand that was kind of specifically around, what was it, Shell and Woodside being sponsors. So
yeah.
I guess, there's an argument that I mean, myself and probably a lot of people think that Greens MPs or people shouldn't go because it is just this hideous display of solidarity between the political and media class, and it's kind of gross as a thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was having a look through. There's, it's a charity ball. It's raising money for something.
Various things apparently, like salvos to,
But the things that get auctioned off are like dinner with the Prime Minister. Or dinner with a bunch of like the top political journalists, and the people who buy them are insiders who already get to have dinner with these people. Like the person who bought the there was a dinner with the 7 News political editor Mike Riley, Guardian Australia's Karen Middleton, 9 News' Andrew Probran, and the West Australian's Katina Curtis. And it was bought by seasoned public relations executive John Connolly, who is also known as Lachlan Murdoch's comms man.
Yeah,
And he buys it every year. There's literally a quote here. I buy exactly the same thing every year, except the price has gone up.
So it's their tax write-off that they count on, effectively. And I mean, the charity angle as well, I was looking at it, they raised about $360,000 this year, around $5 million since 2000. So in more than 20 years, like this group of, incredibly wealthy and powerful people have only, $5 million actually doesn't sound like that much. I don't know. It just seemed kind of small to me.
Yeah, but I suppose it's like a more of a political media get together with the charity being the side issue that kind of makes it okay.
Oh, exactly. But then they're like, well, that's why I was going. It's not because I want to rub shoulders with, with everyone. It's because I care about charity.
Well, speaking of rubbing shoulders, there was one little caption from the night that I picked up on.
I saw this.
Yes, because it did end up on the Greens Instagram.
The Greens, yeah.
I love such hate when they do that because it's like, more people enjoying my joke. But
okay.
But there was a picture of Woodside CEO Meg O'Neill, who was standing alongside the Resources Minister Madeleine King. Mm-hmm. But the caption in the CBD column, which is the Sydney Morning Herald Age kind of gossip column.
Everyone kept referring to CBD and I was like, what is CBD?
It's kind of just like column, funny little
like their gossip column
thing. Yeah. Okay. But I was going through all the pictures because that's who I am. And the caption on the picture of those two said, Minister for Resources Meg O'Neill and Minister for Transport Madeleine King. And I'm pretty sure it was an intentional little joke by the caption writer or the writer of the column. But after I tweeted that out, it was very quickly changed.
Yes, because I was reading the article and I was like, oh, they changed it. Boo.
Yeah. Yes. I'm glad I caught that because I'm the sort of person sitting there watching the pictures come in. It's kind of like, it's a bit like watching the pictures come in from the Oscars.
I know, it's an incredibly sad thing to say. We probably shouldn't even say that. I mean, did you have any other favorite looks this year?
I hate to admit, Susan Lee looked fabulous.
Oh, really? I'd have to look her up and see what she
was wearing. Like a blue velvet number, and she was easily the best dressed.
Really? Okay.
She looks great.
That is actually a nice dress. Yeah, it's like this velvet kind of like high neck crossbody thing. It's long. It's elegant.
Yeah, she looks great.
She does look good. I mean, I did I liked Lydia Thorpe's dress that had the kind of it was like stitched together kind of details and had From the River to the Sea imprinted on it. What do you think about the statement dresses? The only ones I saw this time were like that one, and then Anne Alley I saw wore and Violence Against Women one. I don't know if there are any other like statement outfits.
I think Larissa Waters was wearing some earrings that said,
"Oh, that's right."
One of those statement
pro-choice maybe, or something about some feminist thing.
And then Jed Carney had IUD
was it
earrings,
the IUD earrings,
which was really
right.
cute. And one of her staffers who she brought as her date was wearing like a whatever you call the thing that goes here for a guy that's not a bow tie.
Oh, I don't know what that's called. But
it's a button something. But he had a little IUD hanging down there as well. That was good.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the thing, I'm torn because I'm like, that's actually quite cool, but also fuck this whole event and people trying to have their like AOC moment, which Greens MPs have done in the past. But anyway, we can't not talk about the biggest gossip moment, of course, being the hard launch of Georgie Purcell and Josh Burns' relationship. Georgie Purcell being the Animal Justice Party MP in Victorian Parliament, who is like extremely outspoken and quite radical in a lot of things and very pro-Palestinian, has attended all the rallies. And then Josh Burns, the Labor MP for Macnamara, who is very pro-Israel. Bizarre.
Yeah. I've been puzzling over that one for a while because it has been floating around like the Australian and the Herald Sun. And a few days before the ball, they actually did like a splash in the Herald Sun that was like going public with our love story, like, and a very awkward selfie of the two of them.
I know, yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me, but I will say, like, I think for a while I was like, one of their public views must not be their true view, because I don't understand how that relationship can work privately. But Josh Burns has also come out this week, and we might get to this, but he's come out in support of Fatima Payman as well.
Interesting.
So despite his very hardline pro-Israel views, I think he is someone who is capable of putting politics aside.
But this is the thing. I mean, and we might have different views on this, but I've spoken on the show before about how I am incapable of just putting politics aside for like personal relationships.
I'm like, why would I want to talk to a Labor member?
Yeah, or just don't talk about politics, but maybe talk about other stuff.
Why would I want to? What am I going to talk about?
I do not personally understand how you could have even honestly a friendship with someone who has such fundamentally opposing views on something that is so important, like on Palestine and Israel right now. I would just be like, and I think to have a romantic relationship, I just don't understand it. And I think the way that you often see this from the major parties in particular, to my mind, I'm like, they can put it aside because it's not that, they don't care that much about it. Like, I'm like, yeah, honestly, you don't actually care about anything. And so you can just be like, oh, that's just our jobs. Like, that's my position in politics, which I do as a job. And how nice would that be to just be able to like put it aside at night?
I mean, it does seem a bit that way when you do hear about these cross the aisle friendships in Parliament. But I'm also sort of touched by the friendship sometimes when you see that, like, you know, two MPs have put aside their like party differences to focus on an issue together. Like when Barnaby Joyce and Monique Ryan and was it Shoebridge for the Greens went to the US on the Assange trip.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny.
But that's kind of that's almost the opposite direction, right? Where it's like we are opposed as people, but we will work together on this issue that we agree on and care deeply about. Yeah. Whereas I'm like, if you can have a romantic relationship where I would think I want to be on the same page on fundamental questions with my partner, and so if I don't consider my politics a fundamental question, I think it's interesting that politics is my career.
I would agree that I would not probably be able to be in what I've heard referred to as like a cross. Somebody said to me at an event once, I'm in a political mixed marriage. And I was like,
I don't know if you can.
What? Yeah. Like I can understand someone from Labor left and someone from Labor right. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, good
on Georgie and Josh.
And not to call out one of my listeners actually will know who I'm talking about for this weekend. I am going to a Labor Greens crossed mixed marriage actually this afternoon. So I will see it in person. And we've been joking about, you know, is it going to just be like all the Labor people on one side and the Greens people on one side? So I'll see it in action.
I'm Leo Puglisi, Chief Anchor at 6 News. So we're talking all about...
British PM Theresa May has just announced her resignation as Prime Minister.
All right, shall we get into the UK election stuff?
Serious stuff, yeah.
All right. Okay, the more serious stuff. The UK election was held on the 4th of July. Tom was there in London, which is interesting. I'll be curious to hear what it felt like for him being there on election day. But it seems like we all knew it was coming. I haven't been following it, but apparently we knew Labor was going to win. They won in a landslide on the numbers so far. You have looked into this a lot more than I have. What is the political context here?
Well, I mean, it really is about the UK finally turfing out the Tories more than anything. I mean, it's one of those Drover's dog could have won type elections, I think.
That was my impression.
Yeah, well, everyone was just the absolute chaos of the last 14 years and especially the last 3 or so. Well, actually all of them, really. But it does seem like it was very much the public turning on the Tories. There's also some really interesting stuff going on with the vote here because the UK has first past the post seats, so that in their individual seats they don't do preferential voting. It's just whoever gets the most votes wins. So there's a real risk of splitting the vote. There's been a couple of seats that have gone, like the left candidates have split the vote and it's stayed with the Conservatives, but there's a whole bunch of seats that if Reform hadn't run as a party, this is kind of like Nigel Farage's like Brexit far-right party.
Far right, yeah.
They ran and split the vote in a whole bunch of Conservative seats. And so there's like, I think dozens of seats that Labor wouldn't have picked up if it wasn't for that system.
But Reform didn't end up then picking up many seats themselves, did they?
No, they only got 4, including Nigel Farage. So they did way worse than expected. But ultimately, a bunch of the seats they ran in, they split the Conservative vote and handed it to Labor. So the Tories might not have done quite as badly if it wasn't for Reform.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing is Labor's actually won with the smallest share of the vote ever for a winning party. They won about 34% of the vote, which is only slightly more than what they won in 2019, and yet they've won like 200 seats out of it. So the system is absolutely balked. Like it's just
interesting.
It doesn't make sense.
And I mean the parallels, like Tom was sort of flagging this on a previous episode, that there are so many parallels with Australia, and particularly like the 2022 election, where you've got a deeply like a Conservative government that is becoming more and more unpopular as a result of these mounting kind of crises. And so it's clear that probably the opposition is going to win the election just based on them not being the other guys. But at the same time, there's this structural turn away from both major parties. And that's really more what you're seeing. And so, Labor won 2022, but their primary vote was one of their worst results ever, right? But they still managed to win just because they weren't the Liberals.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's also very similar in terms of how Labor has played it. Like they had UK Labor had Jeremy Corbyn for the last 2 elections as leader and quite a left-wing platform. And then they've put in a very centrist candidate running like quite a small target campaign in Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Which is kind of similar to us having had Bill Shorten's 2 runs with like a fairly left-leaning platform and then coming in with a much less brave one and finally winning at the point that anybody could have won.
Exactly. And then they'll that's what I'm like, are they now going to take this as an endorsement of that small target strategy? And probably Australian Labor as well will look at, or the centrists are all going to look at that and go, see, that's what works. We can't ever do anything good because we only win when we have an extremely thin platform that really doesn't aim to fundamentally change anything.
Pretty much, yeah. Although that said, there were a couple of little upsets in there for the left. Jeremy Corbyn, for one, who was expelled from the Labor Party and still chose to recontest his seat of Islington North, which he's had for like 40 years.
Yes.
Labor put up a candidate and he ran as an independent and he won 24,000 votes and the Labor candidate was only on like 16,000.
Yeah.
So people turned out for that.
I saw that, Jeremy Corbyn got more votes in his electorate than Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister, the leader of the Labor Party, got in his electorate, right? He did better. Yeah. So, but I just doubt, I'm like, the Labor Party strategists, all the centrists though, I'm not going to look at that. They're still going to be like, yeah, but the Labor Party couldn't win with that.
Yeah. I mean, they'll find a reason to put that down too, I'm sure. There was a very cute, I was going through Twitter and like finding all the cute little bits and pieces. There was this man in Jeremy Corbyn's electorate. This was his niece who tweeted out a picture of him. My uncle is so ride or die for Jeremy Corbyn. He spent the weekend doing a one-man phone banking of every Congolese person in Islington North. And it's the guy sitting there with his phone.
Bless.
It was very sweet.
I saw that, and then when the Labor MP who lost the seat was announcing his result, one heckler just interrupted, "Unlucky, mate."
Oh, it's such a good system for anyone who hasn't seen this. They make all the candidates stand there on the stage on a little platform as
and say, "I lost."
Well, no. As the results are being read out, every single seat they have
together. Wow, that's so different. That's so funny because, normally you can totally like isolate yourself from all the other parties. Everyone just has their own has their election night party and that's where they'll be and they can be with their people to look sad or happy, whatever the case may be. They don't have to stand there next to each other and be like, who won the debate?
And they find out at the same time as everyone else. And so you are watching their faces as they find out whether they won or lost.
How do is that really the case though now, like with, surely they would be getting results in.
Yeah, they do have exit polls, but the actual like declaring of the seat from their equivalent of the AEC, I suppose, happens. So there was a couple of good ones to watch. I mean, there was when the look on Jeremy Corbyn's face when he
Yeah.
learnt that he had gotten 24,000 votes, was just sort of stunned. Awe.
He deserves it.
Jeremy Bernard Corbyn, commonly known as Jeremy Corbyn, independent, 24,000.
But then the best one, I think, was former Prime Minister Liz Truss lost her seat.
Oh, yes. Which she wasn't expected to, right?
Well, it was because this split vote.
Okay.
Conservatives and Reform actually got way more votes than Labor in that seat. But because first past the post is the worst system in the world, she lost to Labor. But when it was time for them to read the results, they had all the candidates on the stage and she wasn't there. And a slow clap started from the audience.
They're slow hand clapping, apparently. They're in King's Lynn. If we can bring it up, there we go. And that must be for the candidate who is not on the stage. And that would be
a slow hand clap from those waiting for Rishi Sunak's predecessor as Prime Minister, Liz Truss. On the right of the screen, she sidled in to hear that she'd been voted out, losing to Labour.
Until she got up on the stage.
Oh, my God.
And then they announced that Labor had won.
Oh, wow. Oh, no. She must have known. This is where I'm like, you would be getting messages in from people who were counting votes.
Yeah,
and
but you still have to stand there as they declare the winner.
Incredible.
And there was also Jacob Rees-Mogg, who Brexit champion, horrible man. He was the one who said that the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire lacked common sense.
Yeah, okay.
He also lost his seat, and he was up on the stage next to a man wearing a balaclava with a baked beans print on it. So as he lost his seat, he was standing.
The British are insane.
So good.
British are absolutely insane.
I went deep last night. I feel like anytime there's a big international election, I'm sort of not paying that much attention until at the end. And then the day of the results, I learn the system inside and out and I have a great time.
Yeah, no, that's probably the best way to do it. You don't have to deal with the lead up. You just get all the fun stuff right at the end. I remember seeing something and then I couldn't find anything to verify it, but around Keir Starmer, the new PM, being the first. Is he a lord? He's a Sir Keir Starmer, and that was somewhat significant. But then when I looked for this, maybe I was misled, and he's not the first Sir Prime Minister.
I think he's probably the first Labor Sir.
First Labor Sir, yeah, okay.
But there's been a bit of talk about his background because some are claiming he's this working class.
That's how he's styled himself, as I understand it.
So he's from a working class background, but then he went to a very exclusive private school on a scholarship and then Oxford Law, and sort of people are saying at that point you forego your working class claim.
Well, but how is he a Sir? Doesn't that have to come from his family?
Oh, that's a good point. No, I think he's received that.
Okay.
I would say.
Right. Interesting. Yes, I remember I was reading a little bit of analysis from the ABC and it was saying, quote, Sir Keir styled himself as a working class Labor leader and has often pointed out his parents had blue collar jobs. When he mentioned it again last month during a televised debate, it elicited groans and laughter from the studio audience, something that clearly hit a nerve. And then what I loved is Rishi Sunak was asked if he'd ever had to go without something and he was like, yes, all sorts of things. And he cited things he didn't want, that he wanted as a child but couldn't have, like pay TV. And the response obviously sparked ridicule.
That was one of my favourite moments of the whole campaign. Rishi Sunak was just a rolling disaster. But what I don't understand with moments like that is when you're asked, did you have to give anything up as a child? And you didn't because you're Rishi Sunak. Just own that. Just say, I understand I haven't struggled like other people, but don't pretend that not having a skybox was a hardship that you faced as a child.
Yeah.
Don't try.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I mean, I guess you can imagine there would have been a soundbite out of that either way. That's not going to look good when you have a country that is in the midst of a cost of living crisis. That is not a great thing to have someone leading it who never has had to experience that.
Absolutely. There wasn't going to be a great soundbite either way, but when you're definitely going to lose the election and you actually seem to want to lose the election, maybe don't say something really embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, and this was a theme, as I understand it, this is what I mean. The government had kind of been dealing with all of these crises and gaffes and scandals and whatnot over the last few years. I don't know if there are any other ones that stand out from your memory. I know the big ones were who was it? Like the Tory MPs hosting a lovely function while everyone was locked down for COVID is a big one.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was the big one because they had inquiries and stuff into that. That was Boris Johnson's.
Okay. Boris Johnson,
and then there was, I suppose, Liz Truss immediately introducing those like enormous
a mini budget
cuts for the rich. And then they had that meme going of, will she last longer than a lettuce? And shortest prime ministership ever. I mean, also Theresa May was prime minister at some point. Remember that?
Yes. Yep, that happened. The UK. Yeah, we love it. I mean, the good, obviously, from my perspective and probably lots of listeners of the podcast perspective, the good news is the Greens did very well. And again, in a kind of parallel with the Australian Greens in 2022, went from 1 to 4 seats. And these were effectively all the seats they were targeting sincerely. You know, these were the seats that they were like, if we're lucky, we can win these 4. And they actually picked them up. I saw there's this tweet going around that I don't know if this is a person that people know, but some Ben Davison on Twitter.
That's Van Batten's partner.
Oh, this is Ben Batten's partner. Okay, all right. So he tweeted, I loved it. He tweeted initially at 10:07 a.m, Greens in UK targeted 40 seats, look like winning 2. Hubris knows no borders. Hashtag UK election 2024, hashtag Auspol. And then shortly afterwards, he replies to his own tweet, seems I misheard the BBC coverage and they targeted 4 seats. The looks like winning 2 seats was correct at the time, but they have since gone on to win all 4. Apologies to anyone who felt misled. Congratulations to those elected. Apologies to anyone who felt like I just completely humiliated myself by tweeting this information.
Knows no border.
Incredible.
I mean, Ben Davison's having a time at the moment. He's also been tweeting some fairly horrific stuff about Fatima Payman that we might also get into in a little bit.
Oh, good. Okay. So that's why he's kind of on people's radar.
Yeah, he's the one who's been using the word rats.
Yes, we will get into that.
The other thing I'd say, just the parallel with the UK Greens and the Australian Greens, there was another one. It's not just the 4 seats. It's and going from 1 to 4 in one election. It's also in an election where Labor has been elected after a long period in opposition and is kind of running on a small target.
Yeah.
And it's also that 2 have been won off the right and 1 from Labor. And I saw somebody tweet this. It was, I want to acknowledge them. Sky is their handle, Sky Larksery. But pointing out those similarities. Yeah. It really is a very similar outcome.
Yeah, and I saw that I haven't looked too deeply into their platform, but it looks like they sort of, the big things that they were running on is, a proper investment in public services funded by a fairer taxation system, but also climate and also a more, humane approach to migration and to refugees that isn't just scapegoating migrants, because obviously that's been such a big issue in the UK, and it seems like that's kind of a key point of difference for the UK Greens.
Yeah. I think one other win to acknowledge, or 4 wins, is there was a group similar to the one that's now forming in Australia called the Muslim Vote over in the UK.
Yes, yeah.
That was about challenging, bringing out and mobilising the vote in seats with large Muslim populations to challenge Labor over its weakness on Gaza. And 4 new candidates were elected, and they count Jeremy Corbyn as one of their candidates too, because he was on their list of like who to vote for. But 4 candidates got up, all knocking off Labor MPs, including a frontbencher.
Yeah, is that Jonathan Ashworth? So it wasn't it Labor's election campaign coordinator, like someone quite senior in Labor?
I've seen him called their attack dog.
Okay.
So kind of their Tony Burke.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Which is interesting because Tony Burke here in Australia, Tony Burke and Jason Clare are facing really similar challenges in their electorates, which have large Muslim populations. And it just goes to show that being a frontbencher or a senior Labor figure doesn't necessarily protect you from these community votes.
I saw that the candidate that beat Jonathan Ashworth, Shokat Adam, stood up at the count and said, quote, "This is for Gaza." So they were really, I can see that's a bit of a movement there. And no doubt some of the MPs who the Greens are saying they are targeting, or who the Muslim Votes movement are targeting, in Australia would be looking at this and going, maybe that actually is a thing and a real threat to me.
Yeah. And I would argue that it's possibly going to be, it's a different system, so it is hard to apply it evenly. But here in Australia, you've got the fact we have optional preferential voting, so people will feel like it's okay to give their vote.
Or compulsory, right?
Compulsory as well, yeah. But there was a couple of situations where like left-leaning parties split the vote in the UK, but we don't have that problem here. It's like always important to remember you can vote for any party and still have your vote returned to one of the two major parties in contention or whichever two candidates are in the running. So I think it's going to be very interesting for our election. And I also add the fact that Labor are in power here might even add a bit more momentum to this movement.
I agree, because they are the government that is.
They're the government. Yeah. It wasn't knocking, in the UK they were knocking off opposition but potential government members, but here there's more reason to hold the government to account.
Yeah. One other, I mean, talking about just third parties in general and smaller parties, I noticed just looking at the numbers that the Liberal Democrats seem to have gained a shitload of seats, like they've really increased their representation, but the Liberal Democrats in the UK are not like our Lib Dems, right? Like ours are very libertarian, but as I understand it, the Lib Dems in the UK are kind of almost politically like the Teals here.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I do know they're considered like a major party because they do win, like they generally are a major force. Yeah. And they've won, heaps of seats of only 12% of the vote, but it kind of like they're just nicely spread.
Yes,
Kind of like the Nationals, I'd say.
Yeah,
you get
right.
a lot of seats because they're in the right spots.
Yeah, okay.
I'd say they might, I'm not quite sure where they would fit in terms of our political spectrum, but they do really well out of a relatively small proportion of the vote. For example, Reform, Nigel Farage's party, actually got a larger share of the vote than them, but only won 4 seats.
Yeah.
Whereas,
where?
So sad. But I mean, so sad, but there is something wrong with the system.
Yeah, well, no, I think you're right.
Like 12% for the Lib Dems got them 71 seats. Yeah. 14% for Reform got them 4 seats.
Wow. Yeah, okay. That's a dramatic.
They're calling it the most distorted election result ever.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I mean, our election system, obviously by no means perfect, could be very much improved, but every time I see results like this from first past the post contests, it just makes me very grateful that we have compulsory preferential voting.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking at it last night and I was like, yes, thank God for, mostly the preferential part, because it doesn't reflect how people voted. And there were a few people calling it out. Owen Jones tweeted, Labor getting the same share of the vote as they got in 2019, but double the number of seats is insane. Everybody can see that is insane, and obviously it will drive a crisis of legitimacy. Our electoral system is batshit, and we need to finally get rid of it.
Yes. I mean, who knows if we'll see electoral reform, because that's the thing, because it benefits the major parties who then end up in government, and why would they change it when it's working for them? But maybe one day as more and more people turn away from the majors, don't know.
If you can win 65% of the seats or 34% of the vote, why would you change it?
Why would you? So true. All right. You happy to move on to Fatima?
Oh, there is one more thing. We've done plenty, but the one thing I wanted to point out was that Posey Parker, Kelly Jane Keane.
Yes, the transphobe.
She ran in the election, and in her seat of Bristol, she only got 196 votes.
Oh, a similar reception to Australia, where she was like booed out of the country effectively.
Yeah. But there was a trans candidate who ran in a different seat, but sort of as a foil to that, I wanted to make a point. They won 225 votes in their seat. Whereas this high-profile transphobe only won 196. So they're declaring victory over Posey Parker.
Yeah. Well, and I think that Tom spoke a little bit about this on our Patreon episode about the UK election, but just, the wave of transphobia, or that as a kind of growing political issue in the UK, is deeply disturbing. So it's somewhat comforting to see that it hasn't actually translated to electoral results.
Yeah, and you would hope that Keir Starmer notices that, because he bought into some of it.
Exactly. They would be looking at that. Yeah, hope so.
You'd hope.
On one hand, I have the immense support of the rank and file members, the unionists, the lifelong members, the party volunteers, who are calling on me to hang in there and to make change happen internally. On the other hand, I am pressured to conform to caucus solidarity and toe the party line. I see no middle ground, and my conscience leaves me no choice. I'm here to be WA's voice, not just on this matter, but various issues that Western Australians have raised with me, from incarceration rates of Indigenous people to locking up kids as young as 10 years old, from the rising cost of living pressures to families living in cars and tents due to the housing crisis, from struggling to put food on the table and pay the bills to the climate crisis. These are all the issues that West Australians care about.
Well, coming back home to probably certainly the biggest story in Australian politics at the moment. This week, Labor or former Labor Senator Fatima Payman finally left the Labor Party, announced she would sit in the Senate as an independent. It came after early in the week. It was announced that she had been indefinitely suspended from the Labor caucus because she'd indicated that she was willing to cross the floor again, if need be, to vote in support of Palestine, which she'd already done once. Has this sort of played out the way that you expected? I was kind of watching with bated breath because we obviously did a podcast on this last week, and I was like, nope, they're not gonna eject her from the Labor Party. That's not gonna happen, and she's not gonna join the Greens. And I think I still think they wanted her to quit. Like, they wanted to force her out because they didn't want to be seen as ejecting her. But really, that's what's happened, right?
Well, yeah, they didn't want to ultimately have expelled her, but by indefinitely suspending her and then basically telling her the only way you get back in is by agreeing to vote in line with the caucus at all times, you have the choice, expel yourself. And that is what she did. I never thought there was any chance of her joining the Greens.
No, I don't think so either.
Doesn't seem to like the Greens.
Yeah.
In many ways, she is very much a Labor senator, except for on this one issue.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think there was any chance of her joining the Greens. There was speculation. There was a lot of backgrounding going on throughout the week. Labor publicly saying like, oh, we still want her, and if she could come back and be a team player, but like all this horrible backgrounding going on. Suggestion she was going to join the Muslim vote, which is our movement that's echoing the UK one.
Yeah.
Ultimately, she didn't do that. She has decided to be an independent, and so she has said, watch this space. But there is certainly like a similar movement going alongside her. In Western Sydney mostly. But so, there were many headlines that said Albanese was left with no choice to expel her. There was like 3 headlines on Monday morning that all said the same thing. But I would say they left her with no choice.
Exactly.
Really.
Yes, that's my view too. And on Monday, that was when I think she put out that statement that said she had been exiled from the party. She'd had no contact with her Labor colleagues since she'd been suspended from caucus, and she felt that some members were attempting to intimidate her into resigning from the Senate. So I think it's pretty clear the position that she was in. And one of the things that I actually didn't realise until an MP kind of pointed it out to me this week is that she has been operating in the midst of this massive political and media storm with no staff. Like, she is alone, right? Because these are all Labor staffers that would have now left her, as I understand it. And she's just by herself weathering this and having the entire Labor PR machine turned against her, both, publicly and, as you've said, in the background. I can't imagine what that would have been like. And to even hold out as long as she did, I think is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and look, it's carrying on. This morning there are headlines suggesting she's destroying our social fabric across like 4 different mastheads. The one thing I would say in terms of her being alone, the Labor staffers, I think, very quickly left those who wanted a career in Labor. There were some reports, and these were accurate reports, that she'd been in conversation with Glenn Drury, who's known as the Preference Whisperer.
I want to talk
like
about
a very smart political operative who's also talking to the Muslim vote group.
Yes.
Which I think is where the idea...
Because he confirmed that he had informal conversations with her, right? And that he had also been speaking with the Muslim vote, and that he didn't have, quote unquote contracts with any of them yet, but he had conversations.
Yeah. And he's confirmed that Fatima Payman was asked in her press conference and in all of the interviews afterwards if it was true, and she said yes. And I just, on that particular topic, I think it's important to acknowledge, like, Labor works with him still in Victoria. Labor has never had any qualms about working with him. And I think if anything, like, it's just smart that she got some political advice. She clearly did get some political advice.
Yeah,
she's not acting totally alone. But if you're going to make a giant decision like this, you want to know what your options are. And what's going to come at you. And I think I don't want to say, some of the reporting has said that she's like schemed and this has been like,
it's been a month in the making is the kind of the line from Labor now.
I don't think it's in a month in the making, but I do think she's made some smart decisions, and she has politically played this very well. And I don't mean that in a cynical way. I just mean like the fact she did that interview on Insiders, the interview she did with Channel 6 News.
Yes. Well,
I mean,
knowing who that would reach, right?
Exactly. There is definitely some smart operators involved, and that's not to say that this has been underway for a month. I think if you listen to the press conference that she gave as she stood down, she sounded genuinely torn. She sounded like...
I think she is,
And she is someone whose life has been the Labor Party for quite a number of years now. She was like a young Labor president, Labor WA multicultural branch secretary for a number of years. Like, she's Labor. And so I don't think this was some like political plot. I think she just, like, her conscience couldn't take it anymore. Being part of this party where you weren't allowed to speak out and you weren't allowed to vote as your conscience was telling you.
Yeah. And I think that that's probably part of, I think there's whatever bitterness or resentment probably within the Labor Party that's making them lash out at her even more, in the fact that she has come off looking like the better person and they look like fucking evil, and they have not played this well. And just look, even the comments from Anthony Albanese come across as, like, honestly quite kind of bitchy, like the comments that he's given to media, saying things like, quote, I heard, or this might have been in Parliament or in the media, but when he said, I heard a month ago where this was going to go, he said, people can draw their own conclusions. I have mine. He goes, I don't take these issues personally. I've been around a while and I've seen people at various times make decisions to change the direction upon which they were elected, which I'm like, it's all just so, it's so bitchy.
Yeah. And look, he's been like dropping those comments since about Tuesday night.
Yeah.
But, like a week ago, it was all like, we hope she comes back. And like,
yes,
if he really did know a month ago that this was going on, why would he have tried to keep her?
Yes, that's so true. That's a good point.
Yeah. And look, and he's also been making some comments. There were first kind of Labor background comments in an AFR piece, because I've been following this quite closely, suggesting that she's actually going that the Muslim community, by doing this, is going to isolate themselves. And it's dangerous to have parties based on faith when, like, there's no party involved here. There's a movement, but directing people to vote a certain way. But the idea that we don't have faith in politics is quite ludicrous. The Labor Party has like a very like strong Catholic faction that is the reason we couldn't have marriage equality for so many years. It's the reason the Labor Party has conscience votes on abortion. They can have conscience votes for Christian values that mean that people must be able to vote in line with their Catholic faith. But not for this.
No.
This is dangerous. This will destroy our social fabric.
Well, and I want to talk about this because I think I agree that it makes me kind of uncomfortable. I wouldn't necessarily support a religious political part, like religiously predicated political party or a what's the word? But a government that endorses a particular religion, not that our existing government doesn't. But I know I saw that the Muslim vote, even though they've kind of been accused of advancing that kind of agenda, they've said that they're not a political party or a religious campaign. They're aiming to educate and mobilize their community at the grassroots level to vote in accordance with their principles, including justice and fairness, and obviously particularly in support of Palestine and liberation for Palestine. So I do think that people who are on, the sort of side of politics that I am on, I think we need to maintain a level of, what's the word, like caution or awareness when we are voicing support for Palestine and for Muslim people who are being completely shafted and sidelined in this debate by those in power. But also, certainly, if you do believe in secular government, it's important to maintain that distinction. But I actually don't think that is what's going on here. Like, I think it is a matter of going, well, these are groups in the community who want to know how they can vote for people who are going to represent them, not just on a religious basis, but on a basis of standing up against colonization and genocide in Parliament. And so how can we support them to mobilise in support of those motives, not necessarily on a religious level?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that is important. But the groups have, and kind of various spokespeople and community leaders have been saying, well, it's not a party, and it's also not faith-based. It's like we welcome anyone who shares these values. Like, it's a human rights-based movement.
Well, and as you said, that's what it's been in the UK, right? Because you said that it wasn't necessarily only Muslim candidates. They also endorsed Jeremy Corbyn, for example. Yeah, and so, I obviously, yes, we don't necessarily want like different religious groupings in Parliament, but what we're seeing here is a very large segment of the population that feel they've been taken for granted by Labor because they are traditional Labor voters. They're never going to be like coalition voters in like Western Sydney, these certain seats. And so they feel that their vote has been overlooked for some time because they don't have to fight for Western Sydney or for seats like Blaxland and Watson. And so this is more about them saying, hey, pay attention to us because we can mobilise if we want to. And, I think it's so condescending that you see like Anthony Albanese in a press conference yesterday said things like, they shouldn't isolate themselves. It's not in their best interest. And it's like, well, are you telling them that you're in their best interest? Yeah, like they're trying to tell you that you are not representing them, and you're like, no, you just shush.
And I would say this movement would go away if Labor would shift on a couple of things, but like recognising Palestine and it, like showing proper support for Gaza and standing up to Israel and the US. I reckon the movement would lose all its legs. That's how politics works.
That's
same with
right.
the Greens. If they decided to act on climate,
we would.
Goodbye, Greens.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and this is the thing that, they'd sort of already flagged this, but the Greens have said that they're targeting these marginal Labor seats like particularly targeting Muslim voters in those constituencies, seats like Wills, Cooper, Perth, and Moreton, and then, Richmond. I mean, the response, I'm sure you would have seen Graham Perrett, who is the member for Moreton's response to this news. Initially, I saw him quoted as just being like, it's a free country, sure, I'll see him out door knocking maybe. But then he gave this quote to the Saturday paper that would like quite literally, Adam Bandt can go fuck himself. Like, what is the thinking there? What the fuck is the political strategy?
I think when it comes to Labor and the Greens, they just lose their heads. There's such anger towards people who dare challenge them from the left. And this growing, like, and we talked about this last time, this absolute certainty that the Greens are only doing this for votes. When it's actually, no, they're doing it for you to act on this thing.
Yes,
and the threat
because
goes
this
away
is the
if you
only
do the
time
thing,
you do
right?
act is when your votes are threatened. And I think he was trying to have like a real smackdown moment there, and maybe thinking that Labor supporters would resonate with Labor supporters, the kind of, you know, Adam Bandt can go fuck himself. But I really don't think that it comes across that way, because we are talking about an issue that quite a lot of Labor voters really care about, which is why the fuck is Labor not standing in, you know, acting in accordance with the platform and, standing in support of Gaza, which is Fatima Payman's
we've
argument.
seen huge amounts of the Labor rank and file come out and support Fatima Payman. She said as she walked out that I'm speaking for the rank and file.
Yes.
And we've seen many branches pass motions in support of her in the last few days, including one in the Prime Minister's own electorate. Really interestingly, we've seen a whole bunch of chapters of Young Labor come out and back her. Like there's, you know, I linked to a few in the piece I wrote on Fatima Payman this week, but there's like Labor for Palestine, the group within Labor that advocates for this, was like just putting up like graphic after graphic of branches that have supported Payman, and same with Labor, Young Labor. Probably Young Labor left, I'd say. I don't know which branches of Young Labor are left and right, but I'd say it's Young Labor left that's backing her. But
and this is the thing I was sort of thinking about, you know, because we've had conversations on the podcast before about when senators resign from the party on, you know, under whose name they were elected, and senators in particular having been elected to a 6-year term, meaning that she won't have to face election again until the election after this. And normally I would be like, I do agree that it's a little bit like, what the fuck, voters, you know, elected you under that party. They didn't elect you as a person, get real. But in this instance, she actually is, I think, representing those Labor voters who, she's the only one representing them, because the government and the caucus are not, and that's exactly the issue here. So it's kind of, I think, a flip on that usual situation where you then defer, kind of in a way betray the voters. But I think that's actually the reverse of what's happened here, because the Labor caucus and Labor government have betrayed Labor voters.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, you know, I think this debate comes up every time, and people are often guided in which position they take on this depending whether the person in question reflects their views or not. And so I guess as people care about this issue, it is easy to say, yeah, she's in the right, but really she is representing what's in the platform, what the rank and file voted on through, you know, a system that, you know, we can talk about how democratic that system is, but the national platform and the national conference is where Labor decides. And that is partly why they have these solidarity rules. It's partly about the caucus and the trade union routes, but it's also about making sure that they can make sure their representatives reflect what the party decided. Apparently the caucus comes ahead of the platform, and the caucus has decided not now. And that is what has seen her removed, because the caucus is sacred in Labor, and you cannot defy the caucus.
Yeah, and I would expect that probably she will continue to vote with Labor on most things, like, because as you've said, she's still, you can see in her press conferences, she stands up there and she's like, I am a Labor, like I'm Labor through and through. I'm standing up for Labor values. I hold those values dearly. And the government's decision or their position on Palestine does not represent those values.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I would think the same. She did say when she was asked, will you generally vote with Labor, apart from on this, she said, we'll see.
We'll see, okay.
So I don't think it's necessarily going to be cut and dried. She nominated a few other priorities, including the climate crisis, incarceration rates of Indigenous peoples. She listed a few other, like, policy areas, but also I would say that those are also values that people voted Labor thinking they might get. So
and
I
they're
think
often
she
in
is
the platform.
entitled. She's going to act like a Labor left MP, but without being bound by the caucus, which often leads to the right. So again, I don't know if people can complain that she's taken a Labor seat. She's not going to vote like Labor, because she's going to vote like a bunch of people think Labor is.
Yeah. If you looked at the platform, the Labor platform, and went, I want that, so I'm going to vote Labor in the Senate, as a WA resident, then you will probably get what you voted for in Fatima Payman.
Yeah.
One thing I did, I wanted to circle back briefly before the end to go through these kind of attacks that Labor MPs have been backgrounding journalists on, because I think, the biggest one that I saw initially is trying to paint her as this kind of religious extremist, effectively, by talking about how she had said that her decision to cross the floor on Palestine was, quote unquote, guided by God, and how that was, I think, Patricia Karvelis was reporting that shocked Labor colleagues, and it's this really kind of scary thing. I think there's some really Islamophobic undertones there. I also think it's somewhat misleading because, as I understand it, she was just using the common Islamic phrase, inshallah, right?
That's what people are assuming is where that came from. I don't know.
So we don't actually know.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, she has said, yes, I pray, but don't define me by that. I have other values and other ways of making decisions. The fact that I mentioned I prayed for guidance during this doesn't make me she didn't say religious extremist, but that's what they're trying to imply.
Yes. Yeah.
And she was asked in the press conference where she was resigning, what do you have to say to these suggestions that you're guided by God? What kind of
Muslim,
media is this?
What do you expect? And yes, and the obvious question that we still need to name probably is, would those same questions be asked of a Christian MP? And have they? And of course, they never are, because it's perfectly acceptable and normal for, they literally, every politician gets into Parliament and they swear, at the beginning of the day, they still do the prayer, right?
There's a prayer,
yeah,
and there's an optional Bible swearing in.
Yes, you can affirm or you can do an oath. That's true. Yeah, but they do a prayer at the beginning of the fucking day, and you all have to stand there and do that, and that's that's okay. But then saying, yes, as a Muslim, obviously I prayed and I'm guided by God. That's
that was
shocking.
The ickiest thing I saw, and the fact that was run in the ABC and it was run as just anonymous colleagues. And there's been a lot of that. You expect that in the Australian. There's been senior Labor figures questioning her citizenship, despite the fact that they ran her.
Yes.
And she cannot renounce her citizenship because of the Taliban. And she tried and she got legal
so the
advice.
issue is she's got joint citizenship, joint Afghanistan.
Well, she arrived at about 5 years old as a refugee, and she was naturalised as Australian. But she, she's followed whatever steps she could to make sure she renounced any citizenship she might have in Afghanistan, and Labor got legal advice back in 2022 to show that it was fine, and then ran her and now are questioning it.
Cool.
But yeah, you expect kind of these anonymous sources in the Australian and the AFR, Phil Corey ran some icky shit as well. But to run the line that she's guided by God by an anonymous source, I think that MP should be named. I really do. What? That's just someone's piece of Islamophobic speculation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very clear what the intention is there, and certainly, Patricia Karvelis then saying, responding to that and going, I have seen no issue with this. What is possibly racist about this is if you don't see what the implications of running that story in the way that you ran it are going to be, I think is, kind of unconscionable, really.
Yeah. I wonder if she has come around on that one, because there was such outrage at what should have obviously been picked up as dog whistling, not even whistling, open racism. To suggest that someone who is taking a moral stand is not thinking straight and is just letting God drive her.
No, that's right. She's just crazy. Why else would she be? Yeah. Well, she's simultaneously this scheming meticulously plotting kind of political operator that has been planning this out for months, and she is this irrational, crazy, religious extremist who's just acting on the voice of God.
She's also a pawn of the radical Muslim groups, according to the AFR. She's a pawn. She's being taken advantage of. And also the Greens are manipulating her.
It's also the Greens. Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I understand, like, then there's this kind of discourse around labeling a Muslim woman a rat, which I know that rat is a term that is what is used when someone is in the party and then they betray the party. And so I get that's that word, but it's just like, in these particular circumstances, how can you not see that this is not someone just like deciding for political purposes that they want to go out on their own? Like, every single press conference where she's stood up and been like, I want to be in Labor, I support Labor, and has just been absolutely thrown through the fucking ringer by the party, to then be like, oh, she's just ratting.
There's something about like the Labor solidarity rules that seem to have made some people like really like feel like she has like personally betrayed them.
Yeah.
And it's like, Ben Davison, you're not in the caucus. But there's like personal affront to people who really, really have drunk the Labor Kool-Aid and think that like ratting is the worst thing you can do. Not betraying your own conscience, not like staying silent in the face of genocide, but ratting on the party with a capital P. Like, it's scary stuff.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And this is the thing, like, as a Greens member and a staffer, I have had an experience with someone who has had a moment and really turned on the party and like tried to destroy us. And I can so I understand that feeling of betrayal, but I also am like, that's not, that was a situation where someone then went after, for example, just rank and file, like volunteers in the party. And again, I come back to that distinction of, it's like, who is she quote unquote betraying? Because she's not betraying the rank and file membership, the people who do work really hard and who care and who give up their time and their resources of their money a lot of the time to get someone elected on a platform in which they supposedly believe in. That's not who she's betraying. She's just betraying these like powerful, a very powerful few who sit at the top of the party and make decisions that are, in this instance, directly contradicting those members.
Yeah. And we don't see Ben Davison calling them rats, No,
that's right. Exactly. Yeah. No, it's all pretty, it's pretty key. I think it will be interesting to see how the, whether she does end up kind of being more involved in the Muslim vote movement, kind of leading that movement in a way, or just more generally what happens with that movement as we get closer and closer to the next election. And will the Labor Party be looking at the results, for example, from the UK and seeing that is a genuine threat? Will they be able to come up with something more eloquent and effective than go fuck yourselves? We'll see.
Well, I mean, I would think that Tony Burke and Jason Clare, I keep coming back to them, they are powerful members of the party, and they should be very, very worried by the results last night. I tweeted something like, I wonder how Jason Clare and Tony Burke are feeling. And some Labor account like reshared, like just a random reshared, was like, probably very comfortable because they've been such good MPs to their electorate. And I was like, I promise you they are shitting bricks, like sweating bullets. They can see that they have to do something. And like, Tony Burke coming on radio sometimes and saying some nice things isn't going to cut it, because that didn't.
No, it's clearly not cutting.
It's clearly not cutting it because the movement is mobilising.
Exactly.
One day, many years ago, in the previous Labor government.
Until this morning, the vast bulk of Australian voters probably hadn't even heard of federal Labor MP Graham Perrett.
Good morning, Graham.
Good morning. Now they have, because he threatens to bring down his own fragile minority Gillard government.
This is about me keeping faith with the people of Moreton.
Graham Perrett will quit the Parliament and force a by-election if Julia Gillard is dumped.
We now have a Labor backbencher threatening to become some sort of political human hand grenade.
Graham can speak for himself.
Hello, Marion. How are you?
I'm Graham.
About what motivated his comments.
Comments for Graham are for him.
Graham's the only novelist in the federal parliament, so it's not surprising that he's got more creative ways of making arguments than some of the rest of us.
I think it's fantastic that
at least one Labor member of Parliament has discovered his conscience.
Oh, God. Gee, when Tony Abbott's praising me, I know I'm going to have a tough time at the next Labor Party branch.
But government heavyweights aren't pleased.
No, I think in retrospect, Graham might like to think about how this dampens leadership speculation.
And there's no coup, George, so there's nothing to worry about. Chill out. There's no coup, no threat. No coup, no threat. Nothing to worry about.
My good friend Graham, he's copped a bit of media interest in recent days.
These things happen from time to time, and it's I think a one morning wonder.
Not my smartest week.
So in the end, Graham Perrett bravely shut his mouth and fell in line.
We will put the link in the show notes to, you said you had an article out about the whole Fatima Payman saga. We can link that in the show notes if people want to read more. Yeah. Where else can people find you and your stuff?
At the moment, it's a weekly column in Crikey called Forget the Front Bench, looking at different crossbenchers and figures beyond the front bench. So Fatima Payman was this week's. And I'm also on Spin Cycle on Triple R every Thursday night from 7 till 8.
Sweet. Call to action as well this week. I think support for Palestine more needed than ever. You can support Palestinian refugees to settle in Australia by donating to PARA, the Palestine Australia Relief and Action Fund. We'll put the link in the show notes to that. And if you want to find other ways, if you can't donate, for example, if you want to find other ways to support, like going to rally or whatever actions might be happening, APAN, the Australia Palestine Advocacy Network, is always a good source. We'll put the link to that website in the show notes as well. If you want to support the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, or if you're listening, leave us a 5-star review. Tell us how happy you are that Rachel is the co-host now instead of Tom.
Bye, Tom.
You can follow us at Serious Danger AU on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and we're on YouTube. You can find links at seriousdangerpod.com. And until next time, thanks, Rachel, for subbing in for Tom this week with all your wisdom and hot takes.
It's good to be here, especially after the week we've had.
The only good journalist, as always.
And Leo. And
Leo, that's right. Sorry, yeah, the only good adult journalist.
I'm a Leo stan now.
Yeah, I know. Yes. Well, I think we've got some grabs from him in the show this week. So, well, until he becomes an adult, you remain number one. Thanks for coming on the show again. All right.
Serious Danger Australia.